Just times are a little different on these rounds. And we're starting with MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Simser, thank you for your testimony today, and also I appreciate the fact that, did I hear correctly, none of your proposals actually cost the government any money, right? Okay, thank you very much. I also appreciate the fact that it seems to me like you're trying to beef up the criminal code versus the existing approach through the Proceeds of Crime and Money-Laundering Act, correct?
Yes.
And is that primarily because we don't have a great track record of convictions and prosecutions for money laundering offenses?
Yeah, no, that's correct. We don't have a very good record of charging and prosecuting, and when we do prosecute, we're not all that successful in terms of what the outcomes are. It takes a long time, and we don't get very good jail time.
Right. If I was an alien and I had arrived just above Earth and I looked at Canada, I would think we have no money laundering in Canada, right? Because we don't have a lot of convictions. Is that would that be a fair assessment?
If you were truly an outsider, I suppose, but if you are an organized criminal with a Mexican cartel, this is a playground for you.
Right, so this is where they want to come, the bad guys.
Absolutely, they do. And right now, we do have a big problem where we have fentanyl and methamphetamine on our streets. They're coming from Mexican cartels, and actions that the Chinese government took about 10 or 15 years ago have created this insatiable demand for Canadian currency. And it's created this money laundering cycle that we're seeing again and again. We haven't been very successful at interdicting it, though.
Right. That's very sobering testimony. I think everyone should be concerned about this. There was a private member's bill that would actually make it an offense in the criminal code to lie while you're opening a bank account to a reporting entity or a financial institution. Is that something you think would be worthy of exploration? The reason the government didn't support the bill was because they wanted to put the offense in the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act and not in the criminal code.
So the real problem that I've identified is the only way to prosecute for money laundering under the criminal code is to connect money laundering to a predicate crime. And what we're seeing is there are professional money launderers who distance themselves from the underlying crime. So, lying to a bank, that could be fraud. I mean, it can be charged under the criminal code. But if it were made a specific predicate to support a money laundering prosecution, as opposed to trying to find the drug case, the case I talked about, Project Collector, it added a year or two to the investigation because the prosecutor said you need to link it beyond money laundering to drugs. So you need to get into where the drug network is. So while that's happening, we have suitcases with $200,000 per plane flying from Toronto to Calgary or Vancouver.
Right. And Canada's due for a financial action task force review, is that correct?
Yeah, we're up next year. I think we'll start in the spring of next year on the mutual evaluation by the Financial Action Task Force.
Right. And we're under obligation, statutory obligation, to review the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act every 5 years. What will the Financial Action Task Force say about Canada since we've missed the deadline to review that legislation?
I think it's something that they will observe. I mean, they look at two kinds of things. They won't look at whether the parliamentary review in and of itself has occurred. They'll ask whether there's technical compliance and whether we're effective at using things. That certainly will come into the mix, though, if the review isn't done.
You're familiar with net worth assessments from the CRA, is that correct?
Yes.
Would it trouble you to learn that the net worth assessments at CRA have gone from about $1,200, $1,500 a year about 7-8 years ago to under $500 a year?
That's very worrying. And typically where I would see net worth, and I'm not a tax person, but where I would see it is where a drug prosecution or a proceeds of crime case fails. So your last resort is to say, well, the target has a lot of assets and no legitimate income. Revenue Canada, please look at them. And that's where that process comes in. So if it's falling, that's very worrying.
Okay, thank you. Final question, about 30 seconds left. Obviously, people paying attention to the news saw this very sizable fine against Canadian financial institution TD Bank in the U.S. The question is, would OSFI be able to detect the same activity in Canada with the tools it has today, or FinTrack?
Yeah, I mean, Maybe. I mean, but there were worrying signs about TD. So about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a public-private partnership called Project Athena in the lower mainland of BC. And it identified that banks were issuing bank drafts to people who were students and homemakers for significant amounts of money, and there was no name on the bank draft, so it became like a bearer instrument. So this was identified for all the banks. All of them changed their practice except for TD. And so what happened was Mr. Justice Cullen, as part of his commission, actually subpoenaed the global chief anti-money laundering officer to come and testify and explain why. And he said we didn't have the resources to make the change, even though it's a massive bank.
Thank you, Mr. Sisner. I have to give time back to the floor.
Thank you.